today on Ag News Daily.
As pig farmers, we can be the most efficient farmers ever. We can have perfect health. We can have 12 piglets born alive and have perfect barn flow. But if we don't resonate with the consumer or have a consumer to sell to, I think that's where it ultimately becomes a loss.
Well, welcome back to another weekly edition of the Ag News Daily podcast. We are having a busy week this week. I was in Cancun, Mexico earlier this week with Rank Seed. Tanner was in Spain, and now he's at the U.S. Custom Harvesters Convention. Michelle, you are getting that nasty cold bug that is running around, and I'm sure that Tanner and I are probably quickly behind you with all the traveling we've been doing.
Yeah, so you get to hear more of Delaney on the podcast today. But yeah, I don't think I've ever lost my voice, maybe once or twice in my life. So I'm excited to hear you report all the fun stories today.
I'm not envious of you at all. It feels like when you hear your own voice, you think, oh man, that's like nails on the chalkboard for me. That's how I feel, at least. So we'll let you rest up and get to feeling better for next week. But cold and flu season is likely here to stay, especially as we look at cold weather remaining dominant across parts of the U.S. As we see the intense lake effect snow bands continue downwind of the Great Lakes, especially near southwest Michigan and northern Indiana. With more possible cold air that's going to be held in place, we're also seeing cold weather advisories and warnings stretch as far as south as the Gulf Coast and into parts of Florida as well. While most winter wheat remains protected by snow cover, there are a few pockets with limited snow that could see some cold-related stress. Another Alberta clipper will move through late Sunday into Monday, bringing a brief warm-up for much of the Midwest next week, though areas with deeper snow cover will warm a little bit more slowly. Eastern areas like Ohio may struggle to reach above normal temperatures before another round of cold arrives next weekend. Meanwhile, a clash of cold air pushing through the Dakotas and warmer air in Montana is producing a swath of moderate snow across the Central Plains here late this week, followed by another clipper this weekend that brings mixed precipitation and more sustained warm-up into much of next week. But for those folks that went through the tumultuous winter storm in much of the United States this week, I know last I was chatting with some folks, we still saw power outages across the eastern part of the United States into the south. And so if you're affected by one of those areas, I hope you are staying warm and finding ways to stay hopeful during this darker stretch here for that part of the United States. As we transition out of some winter news, let's get into some ethanol news. After weeks of negotiation, a House funding bill last week excluded language that would have allowed nationwide year-round access to E15. Instead, lawmakers are proposing the creation of the Rural Domestic Energy Council to study E15 and other renewable fuels for possible future action. Ethanol and corn groups say the decision delays a solution that was already broadly supported by both ethanol and oil refiners. And that comes at a time when the farm economy is, of course, facing some of the most serious pressure in decades. Farm and biofuel advocates warn that continued delays on E15 are worsening already tight margins, with large corn carryouts keeping prices under strain and input costs remaining high. Studies cited by industry groups show year-round E15 could boost corn demand and lower costs for consumers at the fuel pump and help stabilize rural economies in the near term. And without expanded market access as well, corn-dependent regions risk deeper financial stress. So I know when President Trump was here in Iowa earlier this week, E15 was definitely one of the things he mentioned in front of constituents that came out to see him. So it's certainly top of mind for a lot of folks in D.C., but certainly frustrating at the farm gate level. Well, this year, U.S. farmers will face significant changes to federal programs that could affect their bottom lines in the coming years, and that's been getting a lot of attention the last few weeks. According to Oklahoma State University Extension Specialist Dr. Amy Hagerman, the timing of implementation will be critical for the 2018 Farm Bill. She says one-time opportunity to add new crop base acres could expand eligibility for ARC and PLC payments, while higher reference prices for major commodities are expected to strengthen the safety net beginning in 2026. For the 2025 crop year, producers will receive the higher of either ARC or PLC payments on existing base acres, with newly added base acres becoming eligible in 2026. Meanwhile, the American Farm Bureau Federation reports that the broader farm economy remains under strain despite recent federal assistance. Economist Faith Parham says rising input costs and persistently low commodity prices are driving continued losses across all major row crops, with USDA projecting expenses to climb again in the coming year. She says additional congressional action is needed to help farmers bridge the gap until new safety net provisions take effect later this year, warning that without near-term support, financial pressure across agriculture could continue to intensify.
Well, like mentioned, Tanner has been busy with all of his travels to so many different farm shows. Let's hear what he's been up to.
Farming comes with trade-offs. An extra pass means dinner in the cab. An early morning becomes a late night. Unnecessary restrictions turn into headaches. But when you make Enlist herbicides the foundation of your herbicide program, the trade-offs will be in your favor. Effective weed control that's ready to work when you are. Flexible tank mix options and neighbor-friendly applications, all without the need to jump through hoops. See what you'll gain with America's most trusted herbicide system protecting your Enlist E3 soybean fields at Enlist.com.
Hey, Tanner here with Ag News Daily, down here at the United Custom Harvesters, Inc. annual convention. Hanging out here in Des Moines, Iowa for a couple of days. Want to give you a quick recap on the trip to Spain. Big shout out to Maya Cornheads for having us come over. It was a lot of fun, kind of a neat experience. Got to taste a lot of different foods. Weather was okay, right? Mid 40s, low 50s. Got rained on in Barcelona for a little bit. Took a train ride up into Bahia, where we were able to get to see the Maya factory. Kind of neat to learn about agriculture there. Not any soybeans, very little legumes. Saw quite a bit of corn and then obviously small grains. So kind of neat there, but it was exciting to learn that there's a lot of manufacturing that happens in Spain that comes to U.S. agriculture. A lot of focus on gearboxes and some fine technology that gets put into a lot of equipment here. A lot of discussion around the tariffs and politics as far as the U.S. goes. Questions that we didn't have any answers to on this trip, but great hospitality, a lot of very cool experiences. Like I said, Maya Cornheads is the ones that sent us over there, which was a lot of fun to see their factory. Neat to see how they combine the latest robotic technology with their construction process of those cornheads, along with fine hand-done craftsmanship on those parts that matter, built for durability. But really neat to see a lot of manufacturing that happens for agriculture take place over there. Really cool experience. Looking forward to sharing more of that on the podcast with you. But for this week here at the Custom Harvesters event, really big show. A lot of the major manufacturers, the John Deere, Case, New Hollands, are here to represent these folks, and it's a whole different feel. It's like a family. Everybody knows who everybody is. They got activities for kids every day, but a lot of fun. So I couldn't be with you for the news this week, but wanted to give you guys a very quick update. Heading to a lot of trade shows. So we'll be here at Custom Harvesters. We'll go to CattleCon next week. We'll be at National Farm Machinery Show in Louisville the week after that. Home for a week and then to Commodity Classic. So going to try and grab some interviews, get some really cool people here strung together to share with you as well. So have fun listening to the news. Delaney and Michelle will take care of you, and we'll talk to you next time.
Well, it'll be nice to catch up with Tanner in a few weeks. I think we may not see him until Commodity Classic, but we are just 1 month away from that show. So we'll be down in San Antonio. If you are going to be there, we'd encourage you to reach out. We'd love to connect and maybe grab an interview with you while we're there. As we transition into some other news, Michelle, CF Industry Holdings and Poet have launched a new pilot project aimed at building a low-carbon fertilizer supply chain to reduce carbon intensity scores of corn and ethanol, announced earlier this week. According to the two companies, the effort will track low-carbon nitrogen fertilizer products produced by CF Industries through agricultural retail channels and into the corn production across Iowa, Minnesota, Missouri, and Nebraska, with the resulting corn used, of course, for ethanol. Poet says this pilot could generate an estimated 5 to 6 million gallons of lower carbon ethanol, demonstrating how low carbon fertilizers can support cleaner fuel production for domestic use and export markets. with participation from major agricultural cooperatives, including Winfield Crop Nutrients. As we take a look at some USDA news this week, Deputy Agriculture Secretary Stephen Vaden has accused Mosaic and Nutrien of colluding to control fertilizer prices in the U.S. by limiting supplies. Speaking at a National Agricultural Law Center webinar, Vaden said the administration is committed to ensuring farmers have access to fertilizer at fair prices and will take action against any practices that undermine that goal. He noted that Mosaic and Nutrien account for more than 90% of phosphate and potash production in North America in 2024. Farm Action and Agricultural Accountability Group added that just 7 companies control roughly 70% of crop input sales, including Nutrien's retail operations. And certainly the administration is pushing to move away from that control. And the House Natural Resource Committee this week advanced the Enforcing Safety for Animals Act of 2025 with bipartisan support. This bill is looking at removing federal Endangered Species Act protections for the Mexican wolf and restoring Wildlife Management Authority, aiming to provide relief to cattle producers in rural communities across the Southwest. Supporters included the National Cattlemen's Beef Association and the Public Lands Council, and they say the legislation would reduce regulatory barriers that have limited the ability to protect livestock from growing wolf populations. They argue that current restrictions make it difficult for producers to manage predators responsibly while maintaining the safety of families, livestock, and their land. And I know Tanner's going to be at NCBA convention next week, so we'll see if this topic is on the docket of discussions. The USDA this week also stayed busy launching a new online portal to simplify reporting of transactions involving U.S. agricultural land by foreign individuals, businesses, or governments. The move is part of the department's broader effort to strengthen enforcement and protect farmland under the National Farm Security Action Plan. Agriculture Secretary Rollins says the portal will increase transparency and help verify interests in U.S. farmland, ensuring the security of farmers and their operations. The portal, available at USDA.gov, uses login.gov for secure access and collects the same information currently required on Form FSA 153. So no new information will be needed if you want to create a portal and just poke around, take a look at it, and see what is going to be required of those foreign farmland investors. Switching tracks as we take a look at a new lawsuit coming to light as a federal judge has denied the state of Texas's motion to dismiss a lawsuit challenging the state's ban on cell-cultured protein. The Texas and Southwest Cattle Raisers Association says it remains committed to protecting the reputation and integrity of Texas beef, a product built by over generations from its members. Association President Carl Ray Polk Jr. says the group is concerned about lab-grown proteins being sold in Texas to consumers without long-term health studies and without transparency about their origin. He adds that industries promoting these products often oppose laws requiring disclosure and that refusing consumer transparency should be seen as dishonest rather than innovative. Just a few more stories to wrap up our news for today as we come into 2026 and continue to take a look at farm profitability. The USDA's annual Rural America at a Glance report highlights trends in population, income, and economic conditions across rural communities. This year, the report focused on debt-to-income ratios as an additional measure of buying power and financial health in rural areas. According to Tracy Farragon, a researcher geographer with the USDA's Economic Research Service, rural areas have consistently maintained relatively low debt-to-income ratios compared to their urban counterparts. Lower ratios can improve access to credit, helping households weather economic shocks and build long-term financial stability. Farragon notes that this trend contributes to rural communities' overall resilience, including events like the COVID-19 pandemic. And we also saw the Rural Mainstreet Index climbed above the growth neutral mark of 50 in January, reaching 52, which is the highest level since July of 2023 and up from December's previous level of 50.1. The survey of bank CEOs across rural areas in 10 states indicates modest economic growth, though more than 1/3 of bankers report their local economies are still in recession, and another 27% expect recession conditions in the first half of 2026. While rural economic sentiment improved, indicators for agriculture remain mixed. The Farm and Ranchland Index fell below growth neutral at 46, and the Farm Equipment Sales Index, though slightly higher than what we saw in December at 15, remains very weak at 18.8. Bankers also expressed opinions on trade policy, with nearly 40% surveyed supporting a rollback of President Trump's tariffs.
Just a lot of news. So thanks, Delaney, for taking that over. But in this week's interview, we're talking about protein. There's more excitement that comes around it, that the National Pork Board is bringing some insights together. It's their Taste What Pork Can Do consumer brand campaign is what we're talking about. Let's hear more about the campaign and learnings from Sarah Showalter from the National Pork Board and Morgan Wonderly, a board member and an animal science lecturer at Cal Poly. Let's get into that interview right now.
Well, I'm super excited to be bringing today's conversation to you, all of our listeners, because we're going to be talking about some interesting research coming out from the National Pork Board, looking at different consumer trends when it comes to who and how we're consuming our pork products. We're joined today by Sarah Showalter, the Director of Consumer and Business Insights with National Pork Board, as well as Morgan Wanderley, a National Pork Board member from California. Ladies, thank you both for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Super excited to dig into the research. I find it so interesting, and I think our listeners will as well. But let's maybe take one step back before we get into what the research really showcased to talk about why this research was done by NPB in the first place.
Yeah, so I can jump in there. At National Pork Board, the board has invested in a capability called business intelligence. And business intelligence is really about providing a deeper understanding of the consumer to the industry. So we know that consumers are multidimensional. There are a lot of things that influence the choices that they're going to make, and also influences the choices they may make or change in the future. And so we want to provide a 360-degree view of not only the decisions that they've made in the past, understanding what they've bought, where they're shopping, the cuts that they're buying, the dishes they're preparing, but we also want to understand what that might look like in the future and anticipate how that behavior may change. So we keep a pulse on things like trends or cultural influences or things that may be influencing the things and the choices that they're making, and we want to anticipate how those may evolve. So it's not really just about understanding what they're buying, but it's really getting into both their hearts and their minds. So understanding what they're thinking, they're feeling about the product, and how pork could meet those needs. In doing that, we also look across a lot of different groups. And so, for an example, some are, understanding how consumers on the coast may look different than consumers in the Midwest, or looking at different groups of multicultural consumers. We also look at generations. So how are younger consumers like our Gen Z and millennials looking different than our older consumers like our Gen X and boomers? And we see that there are differences in how they approach food, how they think about pork, and it's really important to understand those nuances to understand how we can meet the needs of those specific consumer groups. And as I think about generations, one of the things that we've really dove into to understand the differences are those younger consumers. And there's some things that really influence and change the way that they think about food and pork, like the role of culture, or how they define convenience and how they get the food that they're, looking for to meet those needs. Balance and nutrition, how they think about that and how important it is, as well as where they get their information about food and the role of social media. And so at National Pork Board, the Taste What Pork Can Do brand campaign is really rooted in these type of data and insights. And we're really trying to understand how we can better help consumers and help the industry connect to meet the needs of those younger consumers, so that they find the product relatable and we really meet them where they are and it fits into their lifestyle.
Cultural preferences is one of those that this research really looks into. Tell us a little more about that, and specifically to you, Morgan, what that means for your students.
Yeah, so growing up in California, one of the most diverse states, right, in the country, I'm surrounded by that diversity every day. And so at the university that I teach at, Cal Poly, our students come from literally everywhere, every background, every culture. And so thankfully, pork is very central to many of the cultures that my students identify with, like Filipino, Korean, Chinese, Italian, Latino, and even Hawaiian. So the data has shown that millennial and Gen Z consumers seek cultural foods in which we're really lucky that pork can shine. So flavor and sometimes nostalgia is what drives the love for many of the dishes in the cultures that I listed. And so now we have to think, how do we replicate those feelings in a college student's world, right? There are so many ways we can do it on campus, through carnitas burritos or al pastor from a taco truck on campus, pork dumplings and rice takeout, or even spaghetti with Italian sausage, whether they're ordering it at home, or a lot of them love to use apps to order it. And so we love pork because it isn't defined by one culture, it's defined by many, and that's what makes it such a versatile protein.
When you think about the culture of eating too, I think about maybe the boomer generation or the older generations, our parents, our grandparents, they may not have focused on food as kind of an experience, but I think definitely millennials and Gen Zs, we want to go out to eat. We want to have experiences with our peers, with our friends. How has that shaped and changed the way that we view how we market ourselves to consumers?
Yeah, I could jump in a little bit and then let Sarah jump in as well. So I think as consumers, that's a great point, right? They're not really asking what meat am I eating for dinner? Instead, they're more likely to ask what type of cuisine are we eating tonight? Are we having Mexican, mom and dad? Are we having Asian? Are we having Italian? And this is a huge place for pork to play. So even in my class, we talk about consumer preferences and discuss how the differences between how students may eat at home with their parents or family versus when they're back in college in class. And so out kind of is the meat and potatoes model, and in is the kind of, are we having Chinese or Mexican tonight?
Yeah, I think, Morgan, you're spot on. I mean, we're really looking at not only how is pork center of a plate, which may meet the needs of those older consumers, the Gen X and the boomers, but really pork as an ingredient to all those global and cultural cuisines. And I think the role of dishes and consumers may know they love carnitas, but they may not know what cut that specifically comes from, but it's something that they want for dinner tonight. So we're really trying to give them solutions that can meet those meal needs and really making them understand all of the great cuisine and options that pork can deliver, beyond just, them being aware of a specific cut.
Like mentioned, we've ate food in different ways in different generations, whether it's experiences, but another one is convenience. Talk to us a little bit about convenience and its role within pork that you found here through this research.
Yeah, so I think this is one aspect of culture that doesn't always come to front of mind right away, but we all live such a busy lifestyle. And so convenience is top of mind for younger consumers. And from the data, we know that both millennials and Gen Z consumers increasingly, number one, they eat on the go. And number two, they also eat at odd hours compared to maybe the older generations or even farm families. So really, there's not any more 3 square meals a day. And so how can pork play in this space? One aspect that the data points out is actually the different definitions of convenience for each data group. So convenience for Gen Z actually means delivery in hours rather than location, which I can definitely say is true for my college students. However, for millennials, convenience actually is defined strictly by speed. So how fast can they get that food to them? But if we think about it, either way, young consumers already love pork. Like Sarah said, they just don't always recognize it as such. So highlighting pork in dishes that they already love, like ramen, tacos, bowls, etc., is a great example of how to win and really meet them where they're already eating. On the plus side, the data shows that 55% of protein-aware consumers actually prefer to source their protein from whole foods like meat and dairy. So definitely good news for pork. As far as ordering in a different way, right? They just may order in a different way than we're used to. And for example, millennials are also the generation most likely to use mobile apps, around 49%, to kind of streamline the ordering process and find deals. On a more personal note, as a teacher and livestock judging coach, I travel a ton. And so 80% of the time when I'm traveling, I have 7 quote unquote starving college students with me at all times. So some trips, it feels like all we do is judge livestock, eat, and sleep. And I wouldn't have it any other way. But if we're in a hurry and I don't want anyone getting hangry, we usually skip the drive-through and go to a gas station. So for me, my go-to order is a snack stick and cheese pack, pork, of course, and a diet soda. My students grab similar items like an adult Lunchable. And we also have found out that 42% of millennials say they're more likely to visit a store, whether it's a gas station or convenience store, if they offer better for you, healthy prepared meals. So at the end of the day, when it comes to convenience, I think pork has to be relatable. It has to be quick, simple, and affordable with no guesswork.
Yeah, so there are a lot of different nuances to what we've talked about so far. So there's price, there's culture, there's convenience, there's the health aspect of pork. When you look at the younger consumers, millennials and Gen Zs, which of those is most important as they're making their pork purchasing decisions?
Yeah, I mean, I think as I mentioned before, like consumers are complicated, right? They're multifaceted. Like all those things are in play. And I think it's really like moment by moment, like different decisions are driving that. So it may be they need an on-the-go need. So convenience really goes to the top of the list. Or, you know, in general, they may be starting off the new year on a really healthy note. And so they're really focused on things like balance and nutrition. And so I think it's, you know, there's kind of puts and takes, if you will, of those drivers, but we know that taste is always king. Balance and nutrition are at the top. Things like versatility, convenience, those are always the things that are in play that I think they're balancing and trying to figure out how to best meet that need for the moment.
And Sarah, a quick follow-up to that too. When we think about this dynamic consumer that we see today, have we always been dynamic consumers like this? And we're just now looking at research, or how has that shifted over time?
Yeah, I think we've always been dynamic consumers. And I think we see those things that I had mentioned, like taste or balance and nutrition, convenience, versatility. Those are very steady and true to be the things that really drive consumers, purchase drivers at the meat case. But I think when you start to unpeel the onion a bit and look at different groups and understand how they view the world, that's where you see some differences. So our older consumers like Gen X and boomers just are in a different life stage. They have different things that they may be managing. It may be a health thing that they're trying to manage their diet to, or it may be, you know, a recipe that they've made for years, where our Gen Z and millennials, I think, are a bit more exploratory. They're, you know, a bit more into that global cuisine. So I think change has always been there. It's just that different consumers look at things in different ways.
To someone who's tuning in as a farmer or person involved in agriculture, what can they do with some of these insights to help? You know, we know that agriculture advocates can be some of the most great people to tell stories and to tell, you know, this is how you can use pork. And so from both of your viewpoints, what can someone in agriculture do with some of this insights?
Yeah, so I think from the producer perspective, I think that, you know, investing in business intelligence to make those informed strategic decisions is very, very important, because without this information, we'll lose. So just having this information and being able to use it is so, so important. As pig farmers, you know, we can be the most efficient farmers ever. We can have perfect health. We can have 12 piglets born alive and have perfect barn flow. But if we don't resonate with the consumer or have a consumer to sell to, I think that's where it ultimately becomes a loss. So National Pork Board's brand campaign, Taste What Pork Can Do, is truly backed with the data. And we want to build relevance to have more people eat more pork more often. And I'm super excited about this campaign and the data that we have behind it.
Yeah, thanks, Morgan. I mean, I'll just add on that. I think, you know, the data shows us that there are nuances across consumers. And so really understanding those nuances and having the industry connect to specifically those younger consumers to meet them where they are, so that the product can be relatable to them, it can fit into their lifestyle, and they can really understand the relevance that pork can bring to those meal solutions that they're trying to meet. That could be things like making sure they understand how much protein pork has in some of those heart healthy cuts like the loin and roast. It could be things like, being where they are, like in our Taste What Pork Can Do consumer campaign, we're meeting them where they are, which is on their phones. And that's using things like influencers and social media to really make sure that we are being relevant to them and ultimately selling more pork and increasing the value of pork for our producers.
Yes, ladies, thank you so much for joining us today. I know we've just scratched the surface of this conversation, but for any of our listeners tuning in, final question for you is, where are places they might see some of this research in practice, or just what should they be looking for to know, hey, this was part of that business intelligence survey or part of that new campaign that you guys rolled out recently?
Yeah, so I'll jump in here. I mean, the Taste What Pork Can Do consumer brand campaign, is really grounded in these insights, and from understanding, what message is most relevant to them, the consumers where there's opportunities, the type of dishes or cuts that we're communicating with them, where we, communicate with them, as I mentioned, social media, utilizing influencers. Like, business intelligence is woven throughout the fabric of all of those things and is very strategic, I think, in helping us make sure that pork checkoff dollars are meeting consumers where they are and really trying to increase that relevance and sell more pork for our producers.
Well, Delaney, what's happening in markets this week?
Well, we're certainly thinking about global demand in the global picture as corn and soybean futures slipped this week as global supplies remain ample and U.S. exports, they are certainly trailing last year's pace. A lot of attention is starting to shift now to South America as well as they get into their harvest season. And we've seen some aggressive selling by Brazilian farmers, which is continuing to pressure prices globally. Of course, as we head into planting season, elevated inputs are also top of mind for many U.S. farmers, as margins are going to continue to potentially shrink ahead of spring planting. And analysts say that near-term sentiment is certainly bearish, with the next USDA's WASDE report expected to bring hopefully some clearer direction after the January report that really shocked the system. The U.S. cattle inventory report is due today on Friday, and many analysts are expecting that may show the beef cow herd stabilizing, with the 2025 marking the cyclical low and only a slight increase in herd size possible, according to Dr. Darrell Peel of Oklahoma State University. Peel says that replacement heifer numbers and feeder cattle supplies are expected to remain tight, which should limit herd growth through 26 and into 27, especially with a smaller calf crop through the Mexican cattle system as well. So I think that likely means still elevated prices for our beef producers as we keep those herd numbers low, Michelle.
Well, I hope, if anyone is sick out there, that they get better and that spring comes. I feel like I say it every week. I am looking forward to spring.
I certainly am as well. I'm afraid we have a late and very strong winter still ahead of us, but time will certainly tell. Again, if you're going to be at any of the upcoming trade shows, NCBA, Commodity Classic, or others, Iowa Ag Expo, please shoot us a note. We'll be there floating around and we'd love to say hello. You can also say hello to us on social media. Follow us on all of the major social platforms: Facebook, X, Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok. With that, Michelle, what do you say we let the people go?
Let's let them go.